You must have been living under a rock if you never heard, read, or came across people pushing PC politics, claiming that some phrases should be avoided and certain words must be banned. The given reasons are usually because these words and/or phrases are racist, because they are sexist, because it's Islamophobia or homophobia, because they might be discouraging, or just because they are offensive to some people for a whole variety of reasons. And if we wish to fight all those things, then we should constrain the way we express ourselves. A noble idea that almost everyone can subscribe to. But what happens when you turn this notion into an ideology? An ideology on steroids, where the will to create a better world, a more tolerant world, outweighs all other considerations and turns from a matter of courtesy and awareness into a practice. A practice to obsess about relentlessly, with a sort of religious fanaticism. For many people and many institutions nowadays, the main way to fight racism and bigotry is to force the practice of politically correct speech and thought.
Don't call them freshmen any longer because it's no longer politically correct. Huh? Elon University is now banning that word from students' vocabulary because it's now considered sexist, apparently.
France may change the words mother and father in official documents, replacing it with the word parents.
Let's just ban the word bossy.
Let's ban bossy.
Ban bossy.
Lauren Conrad is banning body-shaming words from her website. Starting this month, terms like skinny, slim, and thin will be replaced with words like fit, toned, and healthy on the lifestyle site.
But I want us to be super careful when we use the language hard worker because, I actually keep an image of folks working in cotton fields on my office wall, but in the context of relative privilege. And I just want to point out that when you talk about work-life balance and being a hard worker, the moms don't call them hard workers. We call them failures. We call them people who are sucking off the system. No, really, y'all do. That is really what you guys do.
At Free Speech, the University of Michigan is spending $16,000 to implement a new inclusive language campaign on campus. From now on, words like crazy, illegal, alien, ghetto, and gypped will be off limits. Why? Because they're considered offensive.
Right. Now, don't think that you can call this guy right here or this guy right here a husband, because there's a new move right now. Amend the Code for Marriage Equality Act is now going to ask that those words be banned. Representative Lois Capps out of California said this: "Our values as a country are reflected in our laws. I authored this bill because it is imperative that our federal code reflect the equality of all."
24 Democrats already behind her on this. Do you believe that?
A bias-free language guide on the UNH website. Instead of senior citizen, the preferred language according to the guide is people of advanced age. Instead of overweight or obese, the PC term is people of size. Describing someone as rich doesn't work either. Instead, it's a person of material wealth. And here's the one that's really burning hides: the term American, replaced by U.S. citizen or resident.
North Americans often use American, which usually, depending on the context, fails to recognize South America. The school now recommends using resident of the U.S. or U.S. citizen instead.
If it doesn't represent university policy, it shouldn't be on the university website. It's offensive, it's divisive, it's ludicrous, it is a national embarrassment.
Freshman, American, husband, wife, male, female, senior citizens, elders, overweight, obese, rich, bossy, hard worker. Two is a word to ban when applied to women. Ironically, even the term politically correct is not politically correct to speak. One could probably argue rationally that slurs and derogatories should not be spoken in public spheres. Yet, can one say the same on less offensive terms like crazy, ghetto, and obese? Or even completely benign words like rich, husband, female, hard worker, American? If such words could be deemed as offensive, then all words are potentially offensive. And the reason is, if you think about it, the offense is not taken from the words themselves, as they inherently not meant to cause offense. Words like male or hard worker or American. But the offense is actually taken by the personal association of the offended. For many people, the term hard worker is associated with a positive thing, and to others,
but I want us to be super careful when we use the language hard worker.
Everything could be associated with a bad thing. So everything needs to be under the scrutiny of political correctness. Now, some of you might think, well, this is just a fad, a trend that will fade away. However, some of you may have noticed where this fad is coming from. It didn't spontaneously emerge from the general public, from teenagers. It comes from academia, and from the political mindset of the progressive left. A cornerstone of that was in 1970, where the term microaggression was invented to describe the mundane racial innuendos black people in the US experience from white people, later to be co-opted by feminists, and later to all kinds of groups. A term as harmless as "where are you from" to a minority is a form of microaggression. This is just one example of what comes out of academia. There are many more.
Just the title of his book was provocative enough. It's okay to leave the plantation. It's about economic freedom, the new Underground Railroad.
By hanging a flyer in the Multicultural Center, Steve began an 18-month odyssey that wound up in federal court.
One of the students in there recognized the flyer. She confronted Steve and basically told him to take his flyer and go, and if he refused to do so, she would call the police.
That flyer is offensive, and we have a right to not be offended.
What was her objection?
The use of the word plantation.
I tried to explain to him that this was the title of his book.
At 91% of these schools, students could find themselves punished simply for saying what's on their minds.
Anything which is intimidating, which is going to poison the campus environment, can't be allowed.
If a person has their feelings hurt, they will say they've been harassed. If a person feels offended, they will say they've been harassed.
I was harassed and intimidated by that op-ed, by that cartoon.
If you're offended by it, that's implicitly considered harassment.
They don't want to be known as a harasser, so they go away quietly. It's a very clever way of implementing a speech code.
Over the years, speech codes have been used to prohibit some rather innocuous behavior. Brown University banned speech that might make someone feel angry, impotent, or disenfranchised. Colby College outlawed anything that could lead to a loss of self-esteem. Be careful who you turn down for a date. Suggestive looks were banned at Bryn Mawr. Haverford College prohibited unwelcome flirtations, and UConn banned inappropriate laughter. And at West Virginia University, students were told not to use the terms boyfriend or girlfriend. The school says those words are too gender-specific. Instead, lover and partner are preferred.
The truth truly is stranger than fiction. You could not make some of this stuff.
In other words, it is not another harmless trend that we hear on the lighter side of the news. It became policy, and it is a political agenda. It is an ideology. It becomes more and more prevalent because students are indoctrinated and are forced to exercise this ideology.
When you use language that isn't sensitive, you're enforcing stereotypes and promoting a history of violence and oppression.
If you're using offensive and insensitive language, consider cutting out words that can cause real damage.
If you see or hear someone using offensive and insensitive language, report it at purdue.edu/LGBTQ, anonymously or with your name.
And now this ideology is permeating high schools and elementary schools in a form of sensitivity classes and feminist classes, where they are indoctrinating young minds with the feminist theory.
My name is Ileana Jimenez, and I'm a feminist teacher at Elizabeth Irwin High School. For my own purposes as a queer woman of color in the classroom, all these things inform who I am, and I can't separate that out when I walk into the classroom.
They are indoctrinating young minds with the feminist theory, which I guess most of you have no idea what it means or where it stems from. The indoctrination of political correctness begins at an early age. It is really disturbing that we should allow such methods to educate very young children. Since when is conditioning a form of education? Even good education. And if we allow this, what other popular ideas would we be inclined to condition? What is stopping us from conditioning young children to be more politically correct? If we remove quote-unquote bad words, phrases, and ideas by marking them as dangerous and evil, and eventually eliminate them from our consciousness, what happens when we are removing every word, phrase, or idea that might be guilty by association? Anyone's association. There's a system already in place to help you extract racism, sexism, and bias from your system. It is called feminist therapy. Feminist therapy attempts to make the marginalized viewpoints central, and modern-day feminist therapy and theories often address the concerns of people of color, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and gender-variant individuals, people with special needs, immigrants, refugees, and more. those who have experienced oppression may be able to find a treatment that can inspire social transformation in addition to addressing mental health concerns. In other words, it's changing your perception of reality. If your stances are not equal to the feminist stances, then your perception is flawed. You are flawed, and therefore you need therapy. Therapists may encourage those in therapy to engage in social activism as a method of achieving greater empowerment. In other words, it's not just to eliminate what feminists consider as problematic. It is about making a commitment to a social change. It's about politics. Feminists are defining what is right and wrong. They control the narrative according to their own political theories and ideology. And if you are not in compliance with these narratives, then there's something wrong with you and you need therapy. Imagine a political party implementing such plans. Conform to the party's policy or go to therapy. Now, what happens to people who don't agree with PC language and mindset? What happens to the people who object?
At 91% of these schools, students could find themselves punished simply for saying what's on their minds.
In sociology, you get the answer wrong, and you're a bad person.
If you're open-minded, you have to be this. If you're a good-hearted person, you have to be this.
If you don't think that way, well, you're closed-minded.
You are not a good person. That you can't be liked, period. You are evil.
They really believe that this is the only view any reasonable person could possibly hold.
When students are just being bombarded with those ideas everywhere, it starts to sink in.
You pick this sort of thing up. I did. When I was an undergraduate, I learned that certain ways of looking at things were the goodly ways.
When you're in a dominant position and you have very little contact with the opposition, you always tend to think that all decent people think like you, and the opposition must be stupid.
You ended up thinking of Republicans as fools. That was just assumed.
Other perspectives are not valuable, and so there's no need to teach those other perspectives because clearly they're wrong.
For people who take this point of view, their views are objective. They're social science and they're correct. All the alternatives are the ones that are ideology. And so it's the conservatives who are the ones who are ideological. They, the liberals, are objectively correct.
This is a problem. I think a problem even at the very best universities.
They are labeled as racist, Islamophobic, misogynists, sexists, bigots, homophobes, transphobes, and dismissed as terrible, horrible people. This is the ultimate weapon of the peddlers of PC culture, to force people into conformity. The sword of Damocles hangs overhead, to be labeled a scum for life if you don't fall into shape. And it is so corrosive that many times it backfires on the very same people who practice it. Anyone can be a victim to this practice at any time, similar to the situation in the USSR where people could rat on each other for criticizing the government, to be dealt with by the KGB, only to find themselves later in the same predicament. These patrons of PC culture are in control of schools, academia, mainstream media, and governments. Institutions that are directly responsible and have a great deal of influence on shaping our minds, our political standpoints, our perception of reality, and eventually our society and culture as a whole.
The numbers are shocking. Practically all the professors are leftist.
Stanley Rothman conducted a similar study. Nationwide, 72% of the professors he surveyed said they were left of center, compared to just 15% on the other side.
It's overwhelming. Faculties are to the left, overwhelmingly. More so than I anticipated.
This is hardly a marketplace of ideas. This is a monopoly. It's one size fits all. You get up, you get yours, next.
Going to a university today in the United States is like joining a church. You have to be a believer. You have to have the right set of views. Or if you don't, you're excluded.
Ironically, when people voted to ban the word feminist in a poll published by Time magazine about which words should be banned in 2015, feminists were outraged. And apparently they had enough power to force Time magazine to recall this poll and issue an official apology. They didn't care that the majority finds this word offensive. And this is, of course, doublethink. The peddlers of PC cultures are working under the assumption that if we ban words and tell people which thoughts are of a racist or biased nature, if we have zero tolerance to people who think and say anything that might be construed as offensive, then eventually such thoughts would disappear, bias eradicated. Remove the words, and thoughts will follow.